Good afternoon, Salesian High School community. This is Andrew Bondarev. I'm going to be talking about boxing and UFC. Last weekend's fight, Alexander Usik versus Anthony Joshua was definitely one of the most impactful and significant heavyweight fights that we've seen since Tyson Fury fought Wilder before the beginning of COVID. Usyk outclassed Joshua. He won practically at least nine rounds, although two judges gave Joshua 4 rounds and the other one gave him 5 rounds, surprisingly. There has been a lot of controversy in recent years regarding boxing scorecards, as boxing has been talked about as a corrupt sport due to judges giving fighters questionable scorecards. We take a look at past fights like Kovalev versus Ward, Golovkin versus Canelo, the first fight. The second fight could also be argued in favor of Triple G, although Canelo did much better in the rematch. But in this fight, I'd say that ultimately the judges did their job, and Usyk impressed in every way. He was the underdog in this fight. Many people predicted him to be the smaller man who just couldn't match up Joshua's power, strength, speed, and that Usyk's previous fight against Chisora could not have prepared him for this threat that Joshua presented. However, this couldn't have been further from the truth, as he was ready for everything that Joshua threw at him. He was able to use the jab effectively. He was able to win the first 4 rounds convincingly, even hurting Joshua in the 3rd round. And as we take a look at the championship rounds, Usyk won all 3 of them very convincingly, even nearly knocking out Joshua in the last 10 seconds. Anthony Joshua is dealing with a sort of crossroads in his career at the moment. After his second loss, his first loss was against Ruiz, and that was a huge upset as well. He lost in a very emphatic way. He was knocked down about 3 or 4 times in that fight, and he was able to come back and win the rematch. So the rematch was definitely an impressive performance from Joshua, but all of these belts are gone, as now Alexander Usik took over heavyweight boxing at the moment. It's really tied between him and Tyson Fury for number 1 at heavyweight, and a fight between them would be very interesting as we take a look at boxing's climate after Fury versus Wilder, the trilogy, which is taking place in October. So that's going to be a very interesting fight as well, because Fury is coming off of COVID layoff as well. Fighters have not been active since the pandemic, but now as boxing seems to be coming to a full return on DAZN, PBC, as well as overall pay-per-view networks. They have ushered themselves in as definitely a powerhouse. But as we take a look at their competitors, the UFC. We have October 30th, we have a crazy main event and main card coming up, which is Blachowicz versus Teixeira. And on the undercard, I'd like to highlight the amount of Dagestani and Chechen fighters that are taking the spots of previous fighters like Anderson Silva, who is not active anymore. We take a look at fighters such as Nate and Nick Diaz, who unfortunately, they're starting to age and they're not in the spotlight anymore as much. We take a look at McGregor. McGregor is trying to make a legacy for himself after coming back from the Poirier fight. But let's take a look at Magomed Ankalaev. We have Khamzat Chimaev here. We have Shamil Gamzatov. And as well as Magomed Mustafaev, all on the same card as Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling, the rematch. So this is a lot of Russian fighters that are really demonstrating their skill and talent on foreign soil. We take a look at this UFC card, and there's a lot of potential there, a lot of potential for fighters to really make their mark in the UFC. Petr Yan lost his belt to Aljamain Sterling last year, and ultimately Petr Yan disputed that. It was a disqualification that was heavily contested on his side, and it was due to an illegal knee. He was told by his corner at the moment, they use the Russian word "bay," which "bay" means hit, but hit doesn't necessarily mean punch or kick. They were not aware, apparently, of UFC rules, but that ultimately is their justification. It's not really justifying the foul itself. So hopefully in the rematch, things will be made clear between Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling. Aljamain Sterling also demonstrated himself as a real threat to Petr Yan. He has a lot of power and speed, and can seriously hurt Yan. It takes a lot of skill to be in a combat sport like the UFC, or even in boxing as well, because you take a look at the heart and the fight to survive that a lot of these fighters have to undergo during fights. They really have to dig deep. We take a look at Anthony Joshua. He just couldn't find what was necessary to win and to pull it out against Alexander Usik, because we take a look at his corner. His corner was telling him that he was doing brilliantly, that he was doing a fantastic job just hitting him with the jab, not really being aggressive. However, this could not have been true, but because he was losing nearly 6 out of the first 8 rounds. And so this takes a look, we must take a look at how Joshua needs to consider changing his corner coming up, because ultimately who's in a fighter's corner is key to their future and legacy. We take a look at Mike Tyson. He had Cus D'Amato in the 80s, and that was key to his success as a fighter. And ultimately, when Cus D'Amato died, he had Kevin Rooney. Kevin Rooney propelled him to success. He was able to become an undisputed champion, but it all came crashing down when he became promoted, when he started being promoted by Don King. And Don King put his own trainers in that didn't really know Mike. They seemed to be more of like yes men. And this seems to be the case with Anthony Joshua. Anthony Joshua seems to have yes men in his corner. Unlike Alexander Usik, Alexander Usik had the father of Vasil Lomachenko, Anatoly Lomachenko, in his corner for the fight, just similar to his fight against Murat Gassiev, which he also won for the undisputed title in 2018. So Usik, in 19 fights, he's become the undisputed cruiserweight champion, and now he's the unified heavyweight champion. That's quite an achievement for a 33-year-old fighter. Many times we see fighters like Vladimir Klitschko, who dominated heavyweight boxing, but he was criticized as boring and ultimately never really had what it takes to be cemented as like the greatest of all time in the division. But Alexander Usik seems to have the potential to really show the Ukrainian school of boxing in a way that it hasn't been seen before. We see in the UFC the Dagestani school of wrestling has been a major part. We take a look at Khabib Nurmagomedov as well as Islam Makhachev. They have both cemented Dagestan as like a powerhouse of wrestling. We take a look at Ukraine. They're a powerhouse of boxing movement and IQ. Their fighters are all extremely well seasoned. And as well, we take a look at the Russian school of boxing. We have Artur Beterbiev, who is a unified champion in light heavyweight. And we had in years past fighters from Kazakhstan, Gennady Golovkin, Triple G, who really now he's inactive, as he fought Kamil Sijera-Meta in December 2020, but hasn't been active since then, only calling for a Canelo trilogy. There's really no chance of that happening, as Canelo is interested in Caleb Plant and eventually unifying and becoming undisputed champion at light heavyweight or super middleweight, and then light heavyweight potentially. I think the fight to see at light heavyweight is Beterbiev versus Canelo, as that is going to be a very interesting fight. Beterbiev apparently accepted a fight against Canelo during their negotiations earlier this year, but that did not work out. And now Canelo, he seemed to have a lot of trash talk against Caleb Plant, very entertaining, as Canelo has learned English, and he's very aggressive as an individual and in the ring. So we will be seeing a lot more from boxing, but boxing is ultimately being outmatched at the moment by UFC, because UFC is able to provide a much easier service to their viewers. It's one consolidated platform, UFC Fight Pass or UFC pay-per-view, compared to boxing, which has a bunch of different services. People a lot of times just resort to using streaming services that are third party in order to watch the fights. And this has really hurt boxing's reputation and boxing's revenue potential as well. So I think that they should take a lesson out of UFC's book, and they should try to consolidate as much as possible. I think this has also been the reason why many fights have not been made in recent years. It's because of different management companies, different promotional companies that really have not been able to agree, and ultimately boxing's business has taken a hit due to this. Andrew Bondarev signing out.